We are recording. It is 6:30. I want to make sure that your time is used well. And as any of my students who are on this call can attest to, I am a stickler for time. So we get started because it is on time. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Jordan Kanarick. For many years, I was the director of counseling for CollegeWise. I am now a partner of CollegeWise. As of 8 days ago, I have gone out on my own and started Kanarick Consulting. Yes, very clever using my last name. I know. Thank you. But regardless of where I am or what company I work for, there is one thing that we know. Highly selective college admissions are only getting more selective. So over the next hour or so, I'm going to share with you many different tidbits, many different opportunities you have to expand on your applications, where colleges are looking for you to show who you are and grow, and essentially touch on any trends that we are seeing. Now, that being said, one thing you will notice throughout this evening is I'm going to do my best not to read what is already in front of you. If you have questions, I do implore that you ask them in the chat. My goal is going to be to make sure that when you walk away from here, you have so much new information that you are going to be happy you came. And if you have questions after, you can continue to reach out. The question I want to start with, please go ahead and comment in the chat. If you have a friend who is a senior right now, a sibling who's a senior right now, and whether or not they're finding that the highly selective colleges are as difficult to get into as you imagined, a yes or a no will suffice. Now, I'm seeing a lot of yeses, and I'm not surprised by that. If someone said no, I'd actually probably ask them to come off mute and tell me, what was your story? What did they do, right? But here's the truth of it, folks. Oftentimes, it's nothing you did wrong. The truth of it is that when you're a school that is going to have an incoming class of roughly 2,000 students, and you get roughly 20 to 30,000 applications, well, you're probably going to take roughly 3,000 of those 25 to 30,000 to make sure that of those 3,000, you get 2,000. That is what colleges call their yield. The unfortunate truth is that there is nothing you are doing wrong. We have to keep in mind here that there are great educations that happen everywhere, not just at prestigious schools. And what happens at these colleges is more important than where you go. And the reason I share that is because 97 out of every 100 applicants who apply to Harvard don't get in. 95 out of every 100 who apply to a school like Dartmouth don't get in. That number is the same for schools like UPenn, for Yale, MIT. And when you think about those numbers, like I keep saying, the truth is you did nothing wrong. It just so happens there may have been another applicant from another part of the country or pursuing a different major or with an impressive activity background or resume that stood out a little bit more than you did this year. I hope that as you walk away from this evening, you don't walk away saying, wow, I am not good enough to go to college. I hope that you walk away recognizing that the many, many schools out there, roughly 2,500 strong selective accredited universities, we're talking about 5% of them, maybe 7% after this most recent cycle, if we're going to be generous. That is our focus today. That means that there are 93 to 95% of the schools out there where you could go, you could be successful, you can be top of your class, and you can likely get in far more easily. But we're not here to talk about them this evening. So for the most part, it'll be the last you hear of them for now. Let us start by defining a highly selective college. I keep saying those three words. You may also hear me refer to them as HSCs. But a highly selective college is one where many applicants who apply don't get in. It's one where you having a 4.0 is not the key factor. It's a factor, but it's what makes you standard strong. It puts you in an echelon where they say, okay, let's actually consider this applicant and take them to committee to decide. It is one where it is very rare that you can look at a student and say, you have a good shot of getting in. I don't know about many of you, but I did stay up last night to watch Michigan trounce Washington in the NCAA football final. And the next morning, one of the first things that I heard from one of my colleagues was that overnight, Michigan somehow saw more applications come in. Well, when you have a February 1 regular decision deadline, that can happen. But overnight, they saw an uptick in applications because of that game. Michigan was already a selective institution, quite selective. But part of the disconnect we have here is that years ago, it was not. In fact, years ago, many of the colleges that we are going to talk about tonight were nowhere near as selective as they are now. You'll see this list and you'll understand why there may be a disconnect between expectations that you may have for your children and what the reality is today. That top one, USC, is in reference to University of Southern California, or in the mid-90s was called the University of Spoiled Children. It was where families would park their kid for 4 years so they could live in LA and enjoy some time. But USC wisened up. They started to realize that they're not only a great location, but they had access to really good facilities and really good professors because of their location. So over the span of 10 to 15 years, they started taking in some really impressive students and offering them a lot of merit aid. Sure, it was $40,000 to $50,000 at that point to go there, but if we make it $5,000, $10,000, you might come here instead of going to a more selective institution. And in the span of a little under 3 decades, they went from a 70% acceptance rate to a 10. You'll see on here, Michigan is here. And I actually went back and looked at the data yesterday because I was so curious after the Michigan game. In 1998, Michigan received roughly 22,000 applications, a little less than that. And they took about 12,000 of those students. Michigan had a 60%, nearly 60% admit rate 25 years ago. And over the span of that time, they are now one of the most selective state institutions in the nation, and that's only going to get worse given what just happened last night. And to all my Wolverine fans here, congratulations. It's really easy to think, oh, well, I have a good grades. My parents or parents went here. That gives me a leg up. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. And for those of you who are unaware, this past year, SCOTUS ruled that colleges could no longer look at your ethnic background on an application. So when you're filling out the application, it asks those questions, but that information is hidden from colleges until you've been admitted, at which point they will be able to see so they can get a sense of the geography and the ethnicity of their students, but they can't see what you're applying. But just the same week that that decision came out from SCOTUS, you know what else happened? Another lawsuit was put out there. And that lawsuit directed at Harvard again, but in essence, that means to many, against legacies. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the term legacy, it means that you have a parent, a grandparent, or a family member who previously attended that institution. And the argument being made is that legacy admissions, similar to admissions based on race, make it an unfair playing field. Now, for my current juniors and seniors, this decision will take time for SCOTUS to go through, for it to go through the judicial system. But the mere fact that it is happening means that colleges are going to be careful here. So if your parents both went to Northwestern, the only chance that your ED legacy or your legacy matters is if you apply ED, early decision, where they know they're going to get you. If you apply regular decision, even as a legacy applicant to very selective institutions these days, doesn't mean much. They may not put a leg out for you because they know that they're already being looked at for this sort of information. We need to step back and remember this. While colleges are educational institutions, they also care about their name, their prestige, and their money. There's a reason that you don't see people getting merit aid from the schools on this list for the most part. And thank you. Yes, can everyone else still hear me? Yep. Okay. So there is a reason that most of the schools on this list don't offer merit aid. If you have a certain financial fortitude or lack thereof, almost every single one of these schools will cover 100% of your tuition. They've said that. But if you come from Montgomery County or an area like that, and you're doing well, but you are middle class, upper middle class, we're unfortunately a little bit above what the federal government states is the low end of what you need for financial aid. So when you have friends saying, oh, well, I'm going to Berkeley, I'm going to Columbia, I'm going to Northwestern, that may be the case. But those friends are almost certainly paying full freight unless they were able to get loans, in which case they'll be paying those back. So if you're sitting here saying, Jordan, how do I get into Dartmouth and only pay $20,000 a year? Well, the answer is you don't, unless, of course, the government deems it necessary that the college provides you that money. So what am I saying? These colleges are not just educational institutions, they're also financial powerhouses. Princeton alone could afford to never have a student pay based on just the interest they make yearly on their endowment fund. But they know that you will pay because of that name. So to answer the question that is coming through, which is, so is it easier for students with families for full pay at the top colleges? No, it's not, because they have plenty of people who will pay full price. What I'm saying here is that whether or not you can pay full price, these colleges care about the fact that they want to keep bringing money in. So if today you are thinking, I do not want to be paying $70,000 to $80,000 a year and I do not want to take loans out, do not apply to these institutions. They do not care that you don't want to pay. Because if you decide not to, there are 150 people on that wait list behind you who are clawing at the opportunity to hand that check over. The reason Princeton is on this list is I couldn't list every school. I listed a few Ivies, a few others, but Princeton's admit rate is just down there with Columbia, Yale, and so on, just so you know. So here's the reality, folks. We're talking about this little red sliver, a little bit about the blue pizza slice. We're not going to talk about this yellow Pac-Man piece that's eating the icicle and the pizza slice today, but I want you to see this graph because, like I said, it is very important you remember that no matter what your academic standing is, what passion projects you've taken on, how great you are in the activity realm, the captain of the sports teams, right? These 5% are going to be uber selective. So to that point, it is going to be very important that you build a balanced list and you have schools to back up these dream schools you may have. Before I continue, I am seeing some questions in the chat. For the person who cannot hear me, I'd recommend logging out, logging back in to see if that changes anything. Is the larger number of schools that many students apply to lowering the admit percentage for the most selective schools? Yes. In fact, it's lowering the admit rate for many schools. We aren't talking about many of these today, but I'm sure many of you have heard of Rutgers University. It's a school that plenty of students go, yeah, I've heard of Rutgers. That's a perfectly fine safety school. Rutgers got 63,000 applications this past cycle. A 60% uptick in applications. People's fear is allowing for them to drive forward and apply to 16, 18 schools. Up to 20 is what the Common App allows. It is not a move that I recommend for anyone. It is unintelligent and a bad use of your money. However, I do understand that fear is driving this and it is the motive. And as long as people allow fear to enter into the chat, so to speak, you're going to see admit rates dropping significantly because colleges are just going to have so many applications coming in. Another example is the University of Tennessee, 43% uptick in applications year over year. 4-3. You can call it almost a crisis, folks. Now, the truth of it, schools like Tennessee, schools like Rutgers, they're probably going to shoot themselves in the foot this year. They're going to deny applicants who really want them, who have lower GPAs, thinking that all of a sudden they are going to get another echelon of student. And that echelon of student they accept is going to go elsewhere, meaning that Rutgers, Tennessee, others are likely going to have to go to the wait list or to their deferred applicants. But it is making for a far more stressful process. Is your financial status a factor in admissions? For some schools it is, for others it's not. It's a case by case, but students who are full pay at schools like Duke tend to have better outcomes, which is the unfortunate truth. How many colleges do you suggest applying to? My suggestion is around 10 to 12. So many students deferred from U Tennessee this year. Kate, we can talk about a whole list of many others. SAT we will touch on, so let's keep moving forward. There is no magic formula. I'm sorry. If there was, I promise I would share it. This is not a science. This is not baking, folks. It's not like if you add a little bit of extra salt, you just ruined it. This is more like making a nice dish and cooking. You may like things spicier, so throw that spice in. You may be like my father, who thinks that salt is the devil and make the most bland food and make everyone add more to it, right? But my point is, the formula here is you. I know, isn't that cheesy? Isn't that awful? But you, as the individual, are what they're looking at. And remember this, admissions officers have a big job ahead of them. I've heard many families talk about how, oh, this admissions officer I can't believe they would reject my kid. Who do they think they are? Do they think they're above us? No. These admissions officers are most of the time 23 to 27 years old. They resonate more with your student and the music your student listens to than what you and I listen to. They are here to try their very best to admit each student. An old colleague of mine, Arun Panasamy, who worked in the Caltech admissions office, told a really interesting story years back, where he was reading applications, and after reading hundreds for a small school, Caltech, where they only have about 1,000 kids, he was reading hundreds. He found 13 kids in those 100 that he said, I want them to have a spot here this year. He then went in to committee where all the admissions officers meet, and their director that year said, we are going to have a 12% admit rate. The moment he heard that, he knew that one of these 13 who he had fallen in love with, phenomenal applicants, one of these 13 were definitely getting in, and he might be able to fight for a second. So he went through hundreds of applications over a month's period. He came in with 13 that he wanted to go to bat for, and he came out with 2 of them getting in. I don't know why it does balloons when I give the number 2, but there you go. Hurrah, 2 out of 13. The numbers are unfortunately not in anyone's favor. And what we're going to do tonight is we're going to talk about the factors they look at, what you can do to stand out, what they don't want to see. But the reason I share this with you is it's important you understand that admissions counselors are not risk takers at these schools. They do not have to take a chance on a student with even a single B. You know why? Because they have so many students who have 4 APs, an IB diploma, all these other impressive things, a 1580 SAT, and they did it all while getting all A's. That doesn't mean that if you have a B, you can't apply to these institutions. You absolutely can. You get to do whatever you want. But there's a reason they're called B free. If that B is in junior year, it's a pretty easy decision for them to make most of the time, unless you're a recruited athlete or there's something else about you. If that B is in 9th grade, they care a lot less, but they don't want to see any more because they get so many applicants that they do not need to take that risk. So folks, there are 2 realities. These schools are reaches for every applicant who applies every year, unless, of course, again, it's a 5-star recruited athlete. And your grades and your test scores are important. They're factors they strongly consider, but they don't get you in anymore like they did in 1995 or earlier. Now they are baselines. If you're here, we're going to consider you and compare you to the other hundreds and thousands that are there. If they're not, we're going to read your application because you paid $75 to submit it. But from there, we are going to kindly put you in the no pile. And when we send out all of our decisions, you will be receiving a thank you, but no thank you. So before we continue forward, I want to make sure that I can address any and all questions that have come through the chat since. Let's see here. Do some schools play games by rejecting students that they think may not accept their offer to keep their acceptance rate low? Well, some schools will play games, but it's not necessarily rejecting. They may defer you to regular decision to see if you got an EB elsewhere. They may want you to send updated information to them just to see that you're still intrigued. The most selective schools don't need to play games. They're going to get the students they want, but that next tier down, a couple of examples of that might be like a Wash U. Very selective and good institution. They sometimes struggle in the DMV area because not a lot of kids say that they're keen on going to St. Louis, Missouri. So if you don't go early decision, you just go regular decision, they'll probably waitlist you until they see you follow up, show some serious interest, at which point, if they still have space, they may consider you. So there are games, but the games that tend to be played in that in this area. Let me pull it back up. In this area, the 15% more than they are in the 5%, to answer your question. How do schools increase international students affect acceptances for students in the U.S.? Well, quite frankly, the international applicant numbers have actually been lower since COVID. This is the first year that they've seen a real bounce back. It's not that there's more people applying. It's that the same number of students or so are sending more applications out there. That's the bigger issue right now. And sure, they want their students from mainland China, they want their students from India, Zimbabwe, so on. But it's not like those students are necessarily constantly beating out students from the US, which is a common myth. Is there a template or model resume for students who want to try and get internships in their junior year ahead of applying? That's a great question. Honestly, my favorite tool for that, and you're going to laugh, I go to Google and I find one that looks or emulates my students' needs, right? I have a few templates that I use for my students specifically, but one of the things I tell people, go find an athlete's resume, right? Use that because you have 3 different sports. Let that show you what you can do to signify what your strengths are. Is the IB diploma worth it? That's a very loaded question. But yes, the IB diploma is worth it. Do AP scores play a big role in admissions? At the most selective schools, they can. They want to see that you took every AP that you took every AP test for APs you took, and ideally that you got 5s. But really, they don't play a role outside of that. It's not a huge difference. How does IB versus AP make a difference? IB is over AP right now. A lot of schools are starting to do away with AP because the curriculum is falling off. And by the way, I'm just working through these questions quickly. I know, but I just want to make sure we have time for everything. Can a good SAT score take away from some B's in transcript? Nope. They want the A's over the SAT score. In fact, they want both. Do colleges favor unweighted GPA over weighted? Colleges will recalculate your GPA. We'll get to that soon. What about Johns Hopkins? That difficult school to get into? Yes. How important is 4 years of world language? Very important to the most selective schools. So 2 questions that were asked I want to go back to. 4 years of foreign language doesn't mean that you need to take it freshman through senior year. If you took Spanish 1 in 8th grade and you take Spanish 4 in junior year, you're good there. But the most selective schools want to see a love of learning, which we're going to talk about shortly, which means they want to see it across the board. And the other question I want to go back to here is around the IB versus AP piece. If you're in an AP curriculum, I don't want you to stop. It's not like the AP curriculum has gone the way of the dinosaur. It's just that College Board has not invested the same time and energy as they used to in the AP exams. So AP, while it is still strong, some private schools are doing away with it for the purpose that APs do not have the same level of intensity as they did or were seen to a decade ago. But more importantly, it was really difficult for College Board, who runs the AP system, to make sure that it was being addressed across the nation and across the globe for AP courses, the level that it was being taught at. IB, it's a lot easier for people to do that with. So it's one of the reasons the AP curriculum has not been as sought after, but I still recommend APs if you have access to them. What about 3 years? 3 years in a world language? It's fine, but 4 years is what they want to see. Okay. At our school, at our high school, kind of people choose between IB on one hand and AP engineering pathway on the other. Yeah, I mean, the engineering pathway, the PLTW is great. The IB is tough because you're kind of committing to 3 SLs and 3 HLs in a way that not every student's ready to do so. AP gives you more flexibility. Here's the thing to remember, whether it's AP or IB, the schools we're talking about, you're probably looking at roughly 5 APs in junior year and 5 to 6 in senior year, just to be a candidate that they're going to be interested in given the schools you're coming from. If you're being compared to other students at your school who have a full IB curriculum and diploma, and you have 3 APs in junior year, 3 in senior year, it just doesn't have the same je ne sais quoi, if you will, right? So let's continue forward here. 5 qualities that these colleges are seeking. And yes, they are seeking all of them. The first of them is passion, and that won't shock anyone. You hear people constantly talking about passion projects these days. What passion project did X student do to get into Yale, or Y student you do to get into Duke, right? Passion is important, and not necessarily the passion itself, but what it means and signifies. Students with passion don't stop because they hit 50 SSL hours. Students with passion don't stop because all of a sudden, last year I was president, so there's nowhere for me to go with it from here, so I'm done, right? Students with passion make an impact, what we like to call a lasting legacy. And it kind of takes into account the initiative that it takes to pursue your passions. Passion and initiative tend to go hand in hand. And a great example of this, of a student I worked with a few years back who ended up at Tulane, he started a surfing club at his high school. His high school is in DC. Now, I don't need to go around the room here and to ask, where are you surfing in the DC area? Because everyone knows you're not. But what the student did in his sophomore year when he started it, before he could even drive, is I think it was Wednesday that they did it, he would have students come to a classroom, they'd watch surfing competitions. Started with that. It was him and 5 or 6 friends. And then the summer between sophomore and junior year, when he got his license, he took his friends down to a house in Virginia Beach that his aunt owned, a little shack. And they spent a few days on there and they brought a surfboard and they all surfed. They thought it was fun. They came back, they told other people. And all of a sudden in junior year, the surfing club that no one had really considered went from 5 people and boomed to 20 or so. And during those spring months into summer, once a month, they would caravan down to Virginia Beach with a few rented surfboards, and they would surf down there in those 1-foot waves, and they'd wade there and they'd have a great time. And by the time he was graduating his senior year, almost a third of the class, senior class, was a part of this club, as well as underclassmen. When he left, as silly as it sounds, a surfing club, he left a lasting legacy where people on campus still came together because of something he created. Now, I'm not sitting here saying that in order for you to go to a great college, you need to create or start a brand new club. What I am telling you is you need to do something that is different. You need to push yourself out of your comfort zone. You need to try to bring people together, or people already together, try and improve upon something. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a club. Passions come in so many different shapes and sizes. For example, I worked with a student recently who had a true passion for hiking. What do I mean by that? I mean that by the time he graduated high school, he was a 46er, meaning that he climbed all 46 peaks of the Appalachian Trail. He would give up weekends. He'd give up time, friends' birthday parties. He gave up prom. I remember him telling me, because he and his dad had one that they had to go hit before the weather turned or something like that. I can't remember the exact reason, but his passion was so clear cut that he couldn't do it without this. So if you have a passion, don't let the fact that your school doesn't have this stop you. Don't let the fact that, well, I don't really know anyone else who does it stop you. Allow yourself to take the initiative to pursue it. And in doing so, you will show your individuality. I'm not saying go dye your hair blue so that you can say I was the only kid at school with blue hair to make a point. Individuality is you pursuing the thing that you love so much that you couldn't imagine life without it. You'll notice that an example I included here, flight simulation. A student I worked with used to drive an hour-round trip on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays to a flight simulator because he had such a keen interest, not just in understanding the flight, but the engineering behind it. By the time that he was graduating, he had helped the place that he was going to, a small place in Central Virginia. He had helped them actually build another flight simulator. That place went from having 1 to 2 flight simulators because of work that this student put in. And it won't surprise anyone to know that that student is an aerospace engineer right now at a highly selective institution. My point here is this. It is all too easy to focus on the academics. In fact, as I see in the chat right now, there are people asking about a 3.98 versus a 4.0, about this HL versus this AP. Your job is to show these colleges that you have a true and intrinsic enjoyment of growth and learning inside and outside the classroom. It's so easy to wonder if I should be doing AP Physics C versus IB Physics versus this, but the answer is it doesn't matter. It's what fits your schedule and interests more that will still give you the opportunity to push yourself outside the classroom. I've worked with students who have done multiple semesters of research with college professors or online through groups like Polygens or Pioneer and so on. And those students, they did it not because they heard that a kid who went to Hopkins did this. It was because they loved the idea of learning more about how AI was going to impact self-driven vehicles, that they just felt they needed to do it. Did one with a professor at the University of Texas, Dallas, not even a well-known institution, but there's a professor there who needed help. He did one with a professor at Kansas State. He wasn't looking at the name of the institution. He was looking at the opportunity ahead of him. The biggest mistake students are making today is that they are doing things that they think will look good, but that have no impact. The two biggest things that we are seeing right now are students starting podcasts or Instagram or TikTok accounts with the thought that it's going to have an impact on teaching people about mental health or about business. But when you have 1,000 students doing this and they're all applying to the same institutions, it just becomes one and the same. Another thing that we're hearing a lot of is nonprofits creating an LLC, but then you go look at the page and you see there that it looks like somebody who wasn't a high schooler wrote everything here about the student who did it, and that the students had no engagement with it. But because there's an LLC in their name, they think it looks impressive. We are definitely trying to impress these admissions officers, but we need to do it in an authentic teenage manner. Sure, there are plenty of teenagers who have started LLCs, but the student who started an LLC in 8th grade, who by junior year had raised $10,000 for leukemia through their LLC, is going to stand out a bit more than the one who started an LLC in 10th grade and who can say, I've built something, but doesn't really have anything to show for it. This initiative needs to show growth. It needs to show a lasting legacy. It needs to show impact. I'm going to pause here before we go into the next round. I see a lot of questions coming through. I want to do my best to try and address them. If it's something I'm going to address coming up, I'm going to skip it. Just so you know, it's not that I'm ignoring. If you reach maximum level of language in sophomore year and can take 4 years, what does that show? And can't take 4 years? Well, if you've reached the maximum level, then that's it. Your school is going to send a school report to each of the institutions you apply. If the maximum level at your school is Italian 3 or Italian 4, and that's what you hit in sophomore year, great. If it's Italian 2, well, take the initiative to pursue that passion outside of school, maybe at the local community college. Is community volunteer work very important as extracurriculars? Absolutely. I want to see you making an impact in your community. So, by the way, there's no bad extracurricular. Care, commitment, and consistency are the things I want to see there. Is the early college program good? Yeah, it's good. I will tell you right now, most of the more selective schools are going to prefer to see things like the IB, AP in 4 years, but I like the early college program. It's right for some students. Will having an unweighted GPA of 3.9 instead of 4.0 make a difference? Not necessarily, but at the most selective schools, if there's students from your school with a 4.0 at the same course rigor, they'll notice it. Somebody asked a very specific question around physics. I'm going to ask that we cover that later since it's not general enough for the group. Can internships help you get into the college and help you stand out to the admin of the college you want? Sure. What's the internship? Is it the NIH internship that everyone applies to, but they have like 2 spots for? Or is it an internship with a friend's dad's company where you sit there twiddling your thumbs for 2 weeks and you get to put on there that you worked at a venture capitalist firm for 15 hours a week? Internships, volunteering, part-time job, college course, summer program. There needs to be a narrative here. You need to show me where you want to spend your time on my campus. That's why these activities matter. If you're doing 10 different things in 10 different areas, I'm Dartmouth. I don't know where I'm going to see you impact my campus. Whereas if your interests are more pointed in a couple areas, I could see the depth in which you're going to commit to my community here. That makes it a bit easier for me to see how you might fit in or add to the mold. So next up, a love of learning. And that may sound like, oh, obvious. Thanks, Jordan. Really appreciate that. But it's not as obvious as you might think. A love of learning is you going deep into every realm you can academically. So for my IB kids, a love of learning is actually a lot easier to show because you're taking 3 HLs and 3 SLs. For my student who's in APs, well, let's say junior year, you take AP Calc BC, you take AP Physics C, and you take, let's go with APES, right? AP Environmental Sciences, you wanted an easy AP. And then you have English 11 honors, you have honors US history, and you have Spanish 3 regular, right? What you're telling me is you're going to excel in the STEM area, but you don't have as much interest in the humanities, which is totally your prerogative and totally your call. But the students who are standing out to the most selective schools are taking AP Physics while they're also doing AP Lang. They're taking A Push or AP World while they're also doing AP Stats or AP Calc AB. They don't stop at just the place that they think looks better. They do it because they know that they love to learn and they're going to put their effort into the greatest depths possible. And the truth of it is, these students are also getting A's in those classes while they do things outside. And by the way, I, for one, wasn't that student. I could not have taken 5 APs. It would have crushed me. And not everyone can. But plenty of students apply to schools like a Dartmouth or a Harvard or a Yale with 2 or 3 APs in junior year, 2 or 3 in senior year, have a 4.0 and think, well, I got great grades, so why wouldn't I? The reason is because These schools are going to look and they're going to compare you to your classmates from BCC, from WJ, from RM, from Churchill, from Whitman. And they're going to have plenty of other applicants just from those schools. And I didn't even name the others from MoCo or from Howard County or Baltimore County and so on, who have taken their most rigorous course schedule and excelled within it. You got to have balance because you can't take 5 APs and get Bs and think, oh, well, I did what that guy said. If you can't handle 5, you don't handle 5. But that may also help you to understand which sort of schools may be of a good fit for you. And lastly, and the one that nobody thinks about, because as you can see in this chat, everyone's asked about what grades you need, what the admit rate is here, so on. There is a factor here that is very important, and that is the likability of the student and their fit at the institution. Every year, I hear from at least one student who wants to apply to both Brown and UPenn, and I ask them why. Well, why wouldn't I, Jordan? They're both Ivies and they're great schools. The student who would excel at one would not excel at the other. The student who goes to UPenn would not enjoy the open curriculum that Brown has to offer, where you basically create your major along the way. And the student who wants an inclusive community and freedom at Brown is going to hate the idea of having a very structured core curriculum and a dog-eat-dog society that UPenn might offer. We didn't even mention the difference in location there. Remember this. It will be very important that as you're considering these uber selective schools, that the ones you select aren't just a good fit for you, but that it goes both ways. In fact, for many years now, UPenn has not just asked, why are you a good addition to our campus? They want to know how UPenn will impact you as well. They want you to recognize the ability to not just take advantage of what they have, but what are they going to get from you in return? So focus on fit. Consider what you need to be successful. And the likability factor, your personal statement better show me the authentic 17 to 18-year-old that's applying and something very interesting about you that I don't yet know. Don't go talking about how you start an LLC in order to help people in need and how impressive you are. That's not likable. That doesn't pass the freshman year roommate test. Make sure that you can present all of these qualities. Before we continue, I am seeing a lot of questions about specific to you about, do colleges prefer this course or this course? I can't answer that without knowing your background, and it would be unfair for me to try to answer that and do so when we have almost 200 people, or wow, 300 people. Welcome all on this. Please ask questions that are more broad so that we can address everyone. So quickly, how badly does one bad year of grades affect a child's acceptancy? Would they ever consider giving? There was a story to explain. In short, there are plenty of colleges where one bad year is one bad year. But for the colleges we're talking about today, one bad year is enough, right? Whether it's 9th, 10th, or 11th grade, they have students that, like we said, they call B free, A's throughout high school and impressive backgrounds. Now, if that bad year was due to, the loss of a loved one, due to personal issues, you can absolutely address that in the additional information section of the common application. But that doesn't mean that they will necessarily say, okay, that's fine. You'll be able to address it, but it's up to them what they want to do with it. Remember, the schools we were talking about today, the 50 to 60 or so, maybe 100 now, given the current circumstances, they have the A's that they want. So they don't need to care about the bad grades, unfortunately. In terms of fit, is visiting the college the best way to get a sense? I love that. Yes, go visit the school. Make sure it's in a place you like. Plenty of kids are applying to Dartmouth thinking it's easier to get in there than it is to UPenn. Are you ready for these Hanover, New Hampshire winters? I can't answer that, but you can. And quite frankly, remember this, they don't care if you visit. These colleges we're talking about today don't track demonstrated interest. You're doing this for you. Colleges prefer AP stat or dual enrollment stat. They prefer AP. How do you know whether or not you'll be a good fit at a particular school? Where can I find that information? Some of my favorite tools, niche.com, NICH.com, unigo.com, UNIGO.com. But the best tool out there, in my opinion, for best bang for your buck, the FISC guide, FISKE. It's a big green and blue book. Mine's in the other room. Otherwise, I'd go grab it. It's an amazing tool, and it's my favorite tool. It's like, I think it's on Amazon right now, and I think it's on sale for like $17.99 or something. The Fisk Guide is my very favorite tool. Are college summer programs like the Georgia Hoya Summer helpful and beneficial? In sophomore year, maybe just give your student a sense of what's like on a campus, but the junior into senior year summer should be more intensive. Programs like Boston Summer Rise or MIT's RSI or Yale's Global Scholars, uber selective, but that's what colleges want from summer programs, or these colleges. Outside that, part-time work. Show me you're willing to put your heart and soul out there and to kind of bag groceries for 20 hours a week. You're willing to work hard. An internship, as we talked about, research is always a great one, especially for the really academically driven student. A lot of volunteering and helping people to show your commitment to community, and a mixture of those things throughout summer are a good use of summer. How important are interviews? Quite frankly, most of the colleges we're talking about today don't really offer interviews until after you've applied, at which point they do an informational interview with an alumni, where as long as you show up on time and answer the questions, it's fine. The colleges who actually care about interviews are college like a Bowdoin up in Maine, small liberal arts school, been test optional for nearly 5 decades now. They put a lot more emphasis on getting to know each of the applicants who apply. But the UPenn, Harvard, and so on, ones that happen after you apply, not all that important. How do colleges assess your likability, fit your essays? We will get to that. Thank you for posting those, Kate. If a student transferred from another country into junior year and they had Bs with top colleges, still consider them. I can't answer that without knowing more about where you came from, the school you came from. But again, realistically, they want A's. Fisk Guide is by year. Does it matter? My kid won't. No, the Fisk Guide, the current Fisk Guide should be fine. That said, if you have a sophomore, I wouldn't buy it yet. You don't need to be researching yet. I start college research at the beginning of junior year. Right now, for freshmen and sophomores, it's all about growth in activities and maintaining good grades. So, looks like we're getting some repeat questions, so I'm going to keep moving forward. We're going to dive in to the academic and personal rankings that colleges assess. We're going to start on the academic side, and I have listed these 3 in order of importance necessarily. Grades, followed by strength of curriculum, followed by test scores. For the record, grades and strength of curriculum are pretty much hand in hand. Test scores, not so much, but we are going to talk about that given what we're seeing this year. So from an academic standpoint, your course selection is exceptionally important. My juniors, my current sophomores and juniors who are going into junior and senior year come next fall, you should be taking the most rigorous course schedule you can handle. If that's 3 APs for you, that's 3 APs. If that is 5 to 6 APs, that's 5 to 6 APs. But that being said, it's going to be important that you be able to maintain good grades in those courses while you also do the 2 sports, the instrument you play outside of it, continue volunteering at the local soup kitchen and everything else. We can't sacrifice grades, but we also don't want to be sacrificing things you do outside the classroom. It is shocking to hear this, but it is true. The applicants that I've seen get into Stanford, MIT, and Harvard, they do 10 activities. They maintain 4 to 6 APs in junior year or an IB diploma. How? Everyone's different. But that is the sort of student who is a viable candidate at these schools. A colleague of mine was talking to me about a student they work with in the Northern Virginia area who had 14 APs through senior year. She had 10 amazing activities, and she was flat out denied by Columbia. She didn't do anything wrong. They probably just had enough students that they wanted from the area already and said, no, thanks. It's that sort of difficulty to get into these schools. From a test score perspective, many colleges are still test optional through the class of 2025, so my current juniors. But here's what I can tell you. Michigan is not walking that walk for students applying from the MoCo area. In fact, to take it one step further, I will tell you right now, I've been seeing more students with test scores get into the highly selective schools from MoCo than students without test scores. That doesn't mean that all of a sudden you can't apply to them. It just means that if you're in between whether or not you want to take it, it's better to give it a shot. If you don't get to this 50th percentile that school wants or higher, you won't send it. But don't just say, because the school's test optional, I'm not going to do it, because they are showing us that while they say they're test optional, They aren't really. So for my current juniors, prepare for the new SAT or the ACT. Give it a shot 1 or 2 times. Use Phil Pine's Capital Educators or a local tutor. I have a number of people that I recommend to my families. But my point is, it's going to be important that you take advantage of the opportunities afforded to you and you try and get the score you want on these exams. If you don't get it, you don't get it. But from my experience so far, they want to see it. On a personal side, we've been talking about activities, essays, matchmaking. So what does that mean? Activities, it's very easy to join. It's very easy to do it because somebody told you to. And those don't stand out at this level. If we're applying to a good school, for example, like University of Wisconsin-Madison, very good school, and you have a number of activities from sports to being a member of Key Club, being a member of the band and other things, you're meeting the expectations that they have for their incoming class by putting the effort in. But if we're going to talk about University of Michigan, UNC, UVA, and then going up from there, WashU, Duke, and so on, I need to see more than just you were a member of the Key Club. I need to see the impact you had on the Key Club. I need to see the impact you had on this group of students that you claim to have worked with. Not just that you went once a week and tutored for an hour, but that you were able to help students there improve their score detrimentally, right? Or exponentially, pardon me. My point is that everything you do needs to show me some sort of growth within you or within your community. That's not easy to do. And so for my freshmen and sophomores on this call, or families of freshmen and sophomores, those are your foundational years where you start building on these. Because by junior year, you want those already set in stone. It's one of the biggest things I focus on with my sophomores right now. Have those 5, 6, 7, 8 activities already kind of a part of your day-to-day. So that when you go from that 1 AP up into 4, you're just kind of, your day-to-day is still the same. It just has a bit more homework on top of it. But trying to do that in junior year, identify what you want to do instead of just executing what's already there, is a lot more difficult. I tend to spend an entire session on the essay. So what I'm going to try and do here is in a couple of minutes, explain to you what it is that they want versus don't want. The 4 key things about the essay are: 1, that you are authentic and it sounds like you. For those of you who figured out this whole chat AI thing, chat GPT, don't use it. They know. And by the way, they've invested a lot of money in software to look into it. Don't do it. Number 2, own your story. I don't know why it keeps doing the balloons, but here we go. Own your story. What does that mean? The details matter. Don't just tell me that you were there on the football team and having a great day. Express to me how you felt in that moment. How you remember walking onto that pitch with the only pink cleats out there. And the reason you did it was to support your sister who is currently fighting cancer. And by the end of the season, it wasn't just you walking out there in the pink cleats, it was your entire team. You helped them do that. You helped them recognize the importance. And, oh yeah, your team through boosters raised $20,000 for that cancer society in the local area. And yes, that was an essay written by a student of mine not too long ago. These are the sorts of things that I want to be learning about you and the specifics. Number 3, don't try to impress me. Everyone thinks that they're supposed to talk about their most impressive thing here. But quite frankly, your activities should already do that. Your background academically should already impress me. Now I want you to tell me why I'd want to spend time with you. So when you think about it from that perspective, one of my favorite stories is about a girl who lost a button up her nose and how she goes on to talk about all the other things she lost throughout high school and how I think the balloons come up with you a V sign with your fingers. I noticed that, I just don't know why. But how, end of the day, those losses turned into wins for her. Now that she wasn't stuck in NHS meetings, she worked with the best buddies and helped a young lady with spina bifida and helped her enjoy her time and kind of work through the issues she was having. She then went on to be a member of her church, where she was a lector, and talked about how all these things she'd lost gave her a better understanding of the world around her and how it doesn't make sense to stop here, keep fighting for what you want. And became a racer within her school for school points. Their school did something like Hogwarts, where they have different courses and different classes and different houses, and how all these things taught her that what's important is trying your best, because end of the day, what do you have to lose? That student, by the way, she applied to highly selective colleges. with a 4.0, great grades, and she got into every highly selective school she applied to. Because while everyone else tried to brag about how great they were, she opened up in a humble manner as to why she struggled, but how she overcame it. Now, I'm not telling you to go write down all the things you've lost at and try and emulate that. We need to find your story. But end of the day, be authentic. Don't try to impress me. Help me understand who you are and be open. Own your story with narrative and don't be repetitive. Don't tell me all these things that I already know from your activity section. Okay. Now, when I lay all those out there, you go, huh, so I have nothing to talk about now. Thanks, Jordan. You do. But there's a reason that my students start their essays in June and sometimes aren't done till end of July. It takes time to identify the right story, to make sure it flows, to make sure your voice comes through, and that it comes off in that likable format we're seeking. I've already mentioned it, but I'm going to come back to it one more time because of its importance. With more and more colleges becoming uber selective, the fit matters that much more. It allows me to compare you to other very strong applicants, but to see the impact you might have here. That fit comes through in a number of ways. Number one is in the yield. The yield, as I mentioned before, is the percentage of admitted students who end up accepting their offer. So if you're Harvard or Yale or Princeton, you don't need to take too many more than what you're already going to take because you're probably going to have a very high yield this year. But a good example of this is one that I mentioned before, WashU St. Louis. They go big in early decision, as does Tulane. And the reason they go big in early decision is they want to guarantee that they have X number of students before regular decision. Because early decision means that you're bound to them, and it does improve your chances because you can only go early decision to one school, right? So if I go really big in early decision, it allows me to make sure that in regular decision, while I accept more students, I have a bit more of a buffer to make sure I hit my ideal yield. So one takeaway, consider which school you're most interested in and consider going early decision there because that binding agreement does help a little bit. For example, Duke this past year, while they had a 28% uptick in early decision applications in 1 year, so they had a 12.6% admit rate, which is lower than Brown, by the way. In regular decision, they're probably going to have about a 5% admit rate. Any given year, UPenn is around an 11, 12%. You're going to have a 4 to 5% admit rate in regular decision. It doesn't make your chances that much better, but it does improve them slightly, especially for very strong applicants. Last but not least, and then I promise we will turn our attention to all of the questions that have come in. Only at the most selective levels like these, and at very small selective schools like Amherst, Williams, and so on, do letters of recommendation carry the same level of strength. All my juniors here are going to end up asking for 2 teacher recommendations. They're going to get one from their counselor as well. And they might get an external one from a mentor. They might get it from a boss. It might be from a family friend who went to the school that they're applying to. But the 2 teacher recommendations matter significantly. The reason why is because it helps me understand the impact you might have inside the classroom in comparison to other strong applicants. You might all have 4.0s and 12 APs or IB diplomas. So how do I compare you given all that? When you have a letter of recommendation from a teacher that talks about just how amazing you were in the classroom, about things very specific that you did there to make the classroom experience more enjoyable, how you helped others, how they don't know what it's going to be like without you next year. That goes a really long way in comparison to the normal letter, which is student did well, they got their homework in on time, they asked good questions, they'll be missed. That is what most letters tend to read like. So a couple suggestions here. Number one, juniors, make a short list now. First semester is about to end. Second semester is about to begin. You have a few months here to really start forging strong bonds with a couple of teachers. And to Miss Hield's point in the chat, you want to do it with core subjects. English, math, social studies, science. A foreign language is okay as well, especially for my humanities-based kids. But start considering who you want to forge those relationships with and do it now. Don't wait until April. Writing's on the wall at that point. Number two, when you ask in around late April, early May, or maybe late May, depending on when your APs are, one of the things to consider is asking them if they have a brag sheet that they want you to fill out. And if they do, fill it out, be specific. Don't give them 8 paragraphs per response, but give them a paragraph for each and give them a sense of why you want them to ask, why you are asking them things you took away from the class, what you enjoyed, and they don't want a brag sheet. Fine, make one anyways. I like to call it a little cheat sheet. You know, in math, during COVID, when they give you like the opportunity to bring in a little flash card and you can put all your formulas on that, think of it that way. Go ahead and write 5 to 7 things you loved about that class, because they can then, while they're writing 60 other letters that year, take those specifics and put it in just to improve upon your recommendation just a little bit more. Letters of rec matter at these schools, just like so many other factors. Whew. I just talked your ears off. So I want to go back. I see there's a number of questions. Let me go ahead and pull these up. Let me scroll back up to the top here. How does the AP capstone track compare to IB? They're comparable, right? You have to decide which one is better for you. AP, like I said, gives you a bit more flexibility. To me, if you have the chance to do IB and you can do it well, that is the way I like to go, just because I know what the IB diploma looks like in comparison to some APs. Because AP capstone, you might end up taking AP Human Geo, APES, AP Psych, which they're APs, but they're just not as difficult as your AP Chems and others. How many of these extremely high standards discussed tonight are applicable to the schools in the blue, silver of the pie? So not many of them, right? Michigan has below a 20% admit rate now. Duke has below a 20% admit rate now. So almost all the schools we talked about were in that little sliver. Do you know if early college students apply as new students or as transfer students? They tend to apply as new students unless they've spent more than a year at a community college. How can you do all of that and still have a normal life as a teenager growing as a person? It's a great question. Some people find that balance and some do not. And for that purpose, like I said at the beginning of this whole thing, not everyone needs to go to an Ivy. In fact, for many, it wouldn't be helpful to them or to go to a school of that level. Finding a school where it's a good fit for you, where you can academically succeed and not be competing against some people who are just eons above you in some academic areas, is better for some students and allows them to grow, to get the internships they want, and potentially not pay an arm and a leg for college. You described attributes of UPenn Brown. Is there a list of attributes or characters of many college somewhere? The FISC guide, but the reason I know that is just because I've been doing this a while, but the FISC guide is probably where you'll get the closest thing to attributes. Niche.com also has a student section where they describe the average student there that can help you to differentiate. If you're from Montgomery County, do you have a better chance at Western colleges and universities? That's a great question. Geographic diversity does matter, right? Excuse me. But the tough part here is when people are reaching so far and wide, sending 18 applications out a year right now, it's hard to know just where they're going. If you're looking west and you're talking about Chapman, you're talking about Redlands, sure. If you're talking about Berkeley and LA and Stanford, no, it doesn't, because they get just as many applicants from the west and east. You know, they just get all the applicants they need. So we're talking about the uber selectives. Geography doesn't play as much of a role because they get plenty of applicants from MoCo. If we're in South Dakota, it might be different, unfortunately. Do colleges have different standards for in-state applicants rather than out-of-state? Yes. State schools have certain requirements for in-state versus out-of-state. An example is University of Florida. They will take 82% of their class any given year will be from in-state, only 18 from out-of-state. Same with UNC. It's why they're so difficult to get into. UNC particularly because where we're applying from is not far away and they get a lot of applicants. If you do well on the ACT, is there any reason to also take the SAT? None at all. Go with one or the other. Don't waste your time on both. What are the best SAT, ACT tools to use to get a near perfect score? Well, depends. Are you already at a 1500? In that case, I would say a couple hours of tutoring. If you're at a 1200, we're probably not getting to a 1600, but if you want to get close to it, courses locally like Capital Educators are great. There's a lot of great tutors in the area at Prep Matters, at Mark's Education. I know a lot of online ones. You can email me and I'm happy to send you some options. Will freshman year grades play a significant part in admittance of a student to a college? Far less important than 10th and 11th grade. But when we're talking about these 5%, they are noticed. They're not nearly as important. So if in freshman year you did okay, sophomore, junior year, you excelled and took really good courses and everything else in the passion project, they really probably won't care. But if you drop down even a little bit to what you had in 9th grade, they will notice. UNC already announced their out-of-state acceptance rate will be 7% this year. Yep, I told you, more applications going out than ever before. Let's see here. Can ED affect your financial package? It's a really good question and it's multi-tiered, but essentially by going ED, there are two things you're saying. Number one, if I get in, I'll go, which means I have a better shot of getting in. If I get in, I understand that if you don't give me money, I'm still going. So the one thing you have to be ready to do if you're going to give yourself a bit of that leg up is accept that they may not give you any merit aid. Now, if you meet the requirements of FAFSA, they may cover you entirely or partly, or they may offer you unsubsidized loans. But if you go ED, you're going. So you got to make sure that you're comfortable with that. Does it matter which subjects the teachers who write your recommendations teach? Depends on what you're pursuing. If you're pursuing something like engineering comp sci, yes, I do want certain teachers like your math teacher, your comp sci teacher, potentially your an engineering teacher, chem, physics, something like that. One thing to note, MIT, they want one math, or they want one STEM, one humanities, right? Other schools are not they're not as strict on what they want. But I will tell you, if you're more STEM focused, you definitely need to have at least one STEM. But I also love the kid who has one STEM, one humanities. Shows that love of learning we discussed. Would having a PLTW teacher write a letter of rec be acceptable? If it's from junior year, sure. It could help, but remember, it's not unless it's a core curriculum subject, it's harder for them to compare across the board. So if it's from sophomore year, no, we want two 11th grade teachers. Yes, there's a recording of the seminar. It will be shared out. Do you have a webinar for less competitive schools? Yes, I do. I do indeed. Is it okay to ask 10th grade teachers? Nope, I don't like 10th grade teachers. It tells me that you didn't have enough of a rapport with your 11th grade teachers, which was your most recent year, and you've had 6 or 7 classes. It can be seen as a red flag. If you're in a situation with a health issue related to that caused you to perform poorly in a specific high school year, you would want to put that in the additional information section to explain what transpired, how you grew from it, or what you learned. But yes, you can address that in the additional information section of the common application. For juniors, I recommend usually asking around the end of April, early May for letters of rec. You may have a teacher who says they won't write it for you until after the AP exam is over, in which case you'll re-ask then, but end of April, early May is the right time to ask. Would doing extremely well on AP test make up for a B or lower grade in the course? No, it will not. The grade matters more than the AP exam to these schools. Well, so does ED matter more for SLAC schools, small selective liberal arts colleges than big schools such as Michigan? Well, Michigan doesn't have ED, right? But to substitute a different one in there, like a UVA, University of Virginia, yes, SLACs, selective liberal arts colleges, care a lot about ED because they're going to fill 50 to 60% of their class there, and they have smaller classes. Oh, wow. We have a lot of questions here. We are running out of time. So folks, I'm going to stay on for another minute or two and answer some of these. My email is here, jordank@collegewise.com. Feel free to reach out to me and I'll do my best to keep going here. But I also know it's getting late, so I don't want to keep everyone. If you have to go, enjoy your dinners. Thank you for joining. Let's see. How much does senior year course load matter? Significantly for these colleges. I want to see that you're keeping with the same trajectory, if not more, than junior year. I want to make sure that you're continuing to push yourself, that you didn't just do it to look good to me and step away. And first semester still matters. Don't let anyone fool you. Second semester, senioritis is okay. First semester, we need it. How do public school kids compete with all private high schools? Colleges don't just want the private high school kid. They like their public schools. Public school students and private school students are different. So how do they compete with each other? Regularly. I've seen plenty of kids from MoCo's public schools get into Duke and onwards, and kids from Georgetown Prep, Gonzaga Prep, not. It's not about the school, it's about what you've done. How important is it to take the SAT more than once? Depends on your score. If you got a 1580 first time, not at all. But you shouldn't be taking the exam more than 3 times or so. Because if you have to divulge all scores to schools, they don't want to see it more than 3 times. Does all this apply to international schools? No, it does not. International schools are going to tend to be a lot more focused on your prospective major and your background in it. So if you're pursuing UCAS schools, schools like Cambridge or Oxford, pardon me, we call it Oxbridge combined, or King's College and so on, they want to see a deep intrinsic focus on that subject. Your personal statement will be focused on that. It's very different. Good question. If he could repeat the most selective summer programs, it would really help not just us, but others. Also, the internship programs here in the area that are most elite. Summer programs, the most selective ones, and the ones that like, again, people tend to apply to. CAP, SCAP, but that passed already, as the Yale Global Scholars, as we're due by November 1. MIT RSI, but by the way, all these have already passed for juniors or whatnot. You can apply as a sophomore next year, but MIT RSI, the Telluride writing program, but you have to be nominated by a teacher at school. Summer Rise at BU, UCSB's extensive research program, the Belkin Lab. There's a number of great ones out there. You can find them with the Google search. Would the debate coach be a good recommendation if he taught me in sophomore year? Potentially as an external recommender, but not as one of my academic ones, unless your relationship was so good that you'd be remiss with. Wow, even though I keep going, I keep seeing more messages. You guys are on one. What about rec from art teacher? If students had all 4 years and has very strong relationship, unless you're pursuing art, don't do it. Can you ask more than the required number of teachers for recs? Theoretically, yes, but if a school only allows for 2, you're only gonna be able to upload 2 through Naviance. So I tend not to waste the teacher's time unless you know that it's somebody you want. If you switch schools in your junior year, I don't know what the question is there. What if you switch schools? What if you did? Tell me more. Thank you. Thank you. You're welcome. My strength is in humanities, but I'm interested in learning more about STEM. Do you recommend sticking with past interests or interests to learn more about? I would focus with what you're interested in. That's what they want to see, depth in your areas of interest. A lot of these are thank yous. You're welcome. You're welcome. You're welcome. Junior year is critical. Yep. If you take a really intense scheduled junior year and get a B or lower in one of the hard APs, is that the end of the road? Not at all. Remember this. You were talking as if like if we don't get into one of these highly selectives, it's over, right? If you take a look at the Fortune 500 CEOs, there are 2 schools at the top for the most CEOs. One of them, Princeton. The other, Texas A&M. What you do in college, folks, is far more important than where you go. Remember that. And I'm not just saying that. There are stats proving it. In fact, Malcolm Gladwell does an entire podcast or recording called Zeitgeist. I encourage every single person here to watch it. I watch it probably once or twice a year just because it reminds me that we have to stop focusing on these highly selectives. It's a really good one, Zeitgeist. Okay. Oh, we came to the end of the road there. 5 more questions. Those attributes you mentioned, the individual characteristics of each school, is there a list of those attributes available somewhere? Yes, in the slides. You can go ahead and email me and I can send you a copy of the slides. That goes for anyone. Also, could you mention in DC area some well-known internship places other than NIH? They're very hard to identify. So that's a really good question. Internships are very hard to come by. And the reason is they're almost never available to high schoolers. You can go on Indeed or LinkedIn or other places, but almost all these internships are looking for people with greatest experience. That's gonna be the local college kid at GW or American or whatnot. Internships, unfortunately, right now, the best way to get them is through connections. I hate that that's the case, but nepotism tends to be the way that people are getting these internships. Otherwise, you're 1 in 1,000 people applying for one spot at the NIH or something along those lines. Oh yes, my email address, it's on this slide, but I'm going to put it right here, jordank@collegewise.com. You can reach out. I can try to address your questions. I can introduce you to colleagues of mine or myself who you may be interested in working with. But to that point, it is now 7:38. I've taken 8 more minutes than I meant to. I apologize, but I appreciate your time. If you email me, I can send you these slides. I'm going to make sure the recording gets to Miss Heald so that she can share it out. And if you registered for this, you will get an email within the next day or 2 with the slides, or pardon me, the recording as well. But folks, thank you for your time. It has been a pleasure. Have a great night, and good to see some familiar names in that chat. Bye for now.